The silence in my house was heavier than the lie she was about to tell. But the real destruction started when I played back the tape and saw my best friend wink at the hidden camera. The smell of burnt toast was usually the first sign that my wife Clara was having a bad morning. Today, it was the silence. A heavy, suffocating silence that clung to the expensive Persian rug we'd bought during that misguided trip to Istanbul. I sat at the granite island, nursing lukewarm coffee, watching the digital clock tick toward 8 a.m. Clara was usually already dressed for her consulting job by now, her heels clicking a frantic rhythm against the hardwood floor as she hunted for her misplaced keys. But today, she just stood in the doorway of the kitchen, perfectly still, like a statue carved from expensive marble and crippling anxiety. Her silk blouse, usually crisp and commanding, seemed to droop around her shoulders. Her face, that beautiful, sharp, intelligent face I'd memorized over 15 years of marriage, was bleached of all color. "Good morning," I said, forcing a lightness into my voice that felt brittle even to my own ears. I kept my eyes on the steam rising from my mug, refusing to meet hers, because I knew if I looked at her eyes, I'd see the whole rotten truth staring back. She didn't respond. She just shifted her weight, a small, almost imperceptible movement that sent a jolt of pure dread through me. This wasn't just running late for work anxiety. This was the kind of stillness before an avalanche. "Clara?" I prompted, finally looking up. She took a slow, rattling breath. "We need to talk, David." That was it. The 4 words every man who thinks his life is perfectly ordered fears most. The preamble to the destruction of everything he's built. I set my mug down with deliberate care, the ceramic clinking softly against the stone. I didn't move, didn't flinch. I'd spent the last 6 months expecting this conversation. The late nights, the sudden, intense need for privacy with her phone, the way she'd started locking the home office door. It all added up to an equation I'd solved weeks ago. "Okay," I managed, my voice surprisingly steady. "What about?" She didn't look at me directly. Her gaze darted past my left shoulder, landing somewhere near the bespoke wine rack. It's about Daniel." Daniel, her colleague, younger, annoyingly photogenic, the kind of man who looked permanently tanned even in the depths of winter. The kind of man who made my aging, comfortable routine feel suddenly shabby. "What about Daniel?" I asked, leaning back against the counter, crossing my arms in a posture of false calm. I needed her to say the words. I needed the official confirmation that the ghost haunting our marriage was real. Clara's hands began to tremble. She wrung them together, pulling at the skin around her cuticles until I could see the faint white marks forming. "I've been seeing him for nearly 6 months now. David, I am so sorry. I don't know how it happened. It just spiraled." The words landed exactly where I expected them to, yet the physical impact was staggering. It wasn't a dull ache. It was a white-hot spike directly to the sternum. I felt the air leave my lungs in a rush. I wanted to rage, to flip the island, to scream until the windows cracked. Instead, I just nodded, absorbing the blow with the grim efficiency of someone who'd already rehearsed the impact repeatedly in his head. "I see," I said quietly. "So, you're having an affair." She flinched at the bluntness. "Yes, but it's over. It is over. I ended it yesterday afternoon. I came home early today because I couldn't stand the lies anymore. I need you to forgive me, David. I know that's asking the world, but I love you, and I hate myself for what I've done." She took a tentative step toward me, her eyes finally locking with mine, swimming with manufactured tears. This was the part where she expected the negotiation, the tears, the plea for patience while she figured things out. But I wasn't ready for negotiation. I was ready for evidence. I pushed off the counter, moving slowly, deliberately, until I was standing directly in front of her. I could smell her expensive perfume, the same one she wore on the night she told me she was working late on the Henderson acquisition. "Before you beg for forgiveness, Clara," I said, my voice dangerously low, "I think you should know something." I reached over to the small antique side table near the entryway. Resting there, almost innocuously amidst the mail and a ceramic bowl for keys, was a sleek, matte black object. It looked like a high-end smoke detector, but it wasn't. It was the custom 4K Wi-Fi camera I'd installed 2 weeks ago, professionally wired into the wall molding, disguised perfectly as a passive air quality monitor. Clara's breath hitched, her entire body locked up. The practiced sorrow vanished, replaced by stark, absolute terror. Her eyes widened, fixing on the tiny, nearly invisible lens. What is that?" she stammered, taking a step back. I picked up the small remote I kept hidden beneath my wallet. My thumb hovered over the playback button. "That, my dear," I said, a cold, unfamiliar smile spreading across my face, "is the record of your last 6 months. And I've been curious to see exactly what spiraled." Her face went from pale to a shocking shade of gray. She stumbled backward, tripping slightly over the edge of the rug. "David, no, you wouldn't. That's an invasion of privacy. You can't just—" "Oh, I can," I interrupted, my voice suddenly booming with an authority I hadn't known I possessed. "And I didn't just record you with him, Clara. I've recorded every agonizing, lying minute since I suspected. And right now, I'm about to watch the tape of the very last time you brought Daniel into this house." I pressed the button. The screen on the remote flickered to life, showing the live feed from the camera, the entryway, the coat rack, the precise spot where she was now standing. But I didn't want the live feed. I wanted history. I scrolled back rapidly through the timeline, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs, searching for the day she'd told me she was going to a yoga retreat upstate. I found the date. I hit play. The image stabilized, showing the front door opening. But it wasn't Daniel walking in. It was a man I vaguely recognized from her company Christmas party. A junior partner, older than Daniel, heavier set, with a shock of red hair. And he wasn't alone. He was holding a large, expensive bottle of champagne and a bouquet of lilies. Clara saw the image on the screen. She didn't just freeze, she visibly withered. She opened her mouth to scream, but only a dry, desperate squeak escaped. Who is that?" I managed, my entire world tilting sideways. The jealousy I felt for Daniel evaporated, replaced by a corrosive wave of something far worse. Clara shook her head violently, her eyes wide and pleading, staring not at me but at the screen, as if the image held the power to burn her alive. "David, please, don't look. That's not—" But before she could finish, the recorded footage shifted slightly. The red-haired man stepped fully into the frame, and as he set the champagne down on the table next to where my camera was discreetly mounted, he reached out and gently brushed a loose strand of hair from Clara's face. And then he leaned in and whispered something to her, something that made her laugh, a sound I hadn't heard in months, before he kissed her, deep and possessive, right there in our foyer. But the kiss wasn't the shock that stopped my breath. As the red-haired man turned away slightly to hang up his coat, the camera caught the distinct, custom-made leather bracelet on his wrist. The exact same bracelet I had designed and gifted to my best man, Mark, for his 30th birthday last year. And then, Mark looked directly toward the camera lens, the one disguised as an air quality monitor, and gave a small, knowing wink. The wink shattered the last remaining fragments of my composure. It wasn't just betrayal, it was a conspiracy. Mark, my oldest friend, the godfather to our non-existent children, the man who held my hand during my father's funeral. He hadn't just been having an affair with my wife, he'd been in on the setup. He had known I suspected, and he had played the part of the concerned friend, bringing me coffee, listening sympathetically to my vague anxieties about Clara's distance, all while knowing exactly where to find her when I was supposedly working late. I stared at the frozen frame on the remote screen. Mark, smirking, his gaze pointed straight at the lens, a clear signal that this entire charade had been a performance for an audience of one, me. Mark? The name was a raw, scraped sound in my throat. I dropped the remote. It clattered onto the granite, the screen going dark, but the image was seared behind my eyes. Clara remained frozen, trapped between the foyer and the kitchen island, her mouth opening and closing silently like a landed fish. The terror in her eyes had curdled into a desperate, hunted look. She knew I had seen it. She knew I knew Mark. "David, listen to me. You don't understand," she finally choked out, her voice shaking violently. "It wasn't supposed to be Mark. Daniel was just the first one. Mark was supposed to be the distraction." "A distraction?" I echoed, taking a heavy step toward her. The air in the kitchen was suddenly thin, metallic. "A distraction from what, Clara? From the fact that you've been systematically dismantling our life with my supposed inner circle?" I moved past her, the need to confront Mark suddenly overwhelming the need to confront her. I strode toward the hall closet where we kept the winter coats, needing to see if Mark's favorite navy pea coat was still hanging there, mocking me. It wasn't. But my eyes snagged on something else, a set of keys on the small shelf above the shoe rack. Not our house keys, not my car keys, but a spare set to the lake cabin. The cabin my grandfather left to me. The cabin Clara knew I hadn't visited in over a year because of the persistent leak in the roof. "The lake house," I whispered, pulling the keys down. They felt heavy, loaded with implication. "When were you there last?" Clara finally moved, surging forward with surprising speed, attempting to grab my arm. "Stop it, David. Don't open that door. That's not the real problem. Please, let's just talk about Daniel and move past this." Her desperate attempt to pivot back to the minor affair with Daniel was almost insulting in its transparency. She wanted the narrative controlled. She wanted to contain the explosion to a manageable radius. But the radius was already galactic. I shook off her grasp. "You think I'm worried about Daniel? Daniel is a stepping stone. Who is Mark distracting you from?" I ignored her frantic denials and bolted toward the front door. I needed air. I needed to find Mark and demand an explanation for the wink, the sheer audacity of broadcasting his involvement to the hidden lens. "Where are you going?" Clara shrieked, scrambling after me. "You can't go there. David, I swear to God, if you go to the lake house right now, you will regret it for the rest of your life." I paused with my hand on the deadbolt, turning back to face her one last time before stepping out into the world that suddenly felt utterly alien. Her face was a mask of pure, distilled panic. This was beyond remorse. This was the fear of consequences far exceeding marital disclosure. "Why, Clara? What am I going to find there that's worse than what I just saw on that screen?" I demanded. "Are you hosting a party for the entire executive board? Did you move Daniel in?" She ran the last few steps and grabbed my shirt front, pulling me close, her voice dropping to a harsh, urgent whisper that cut through the morning quiet. "Mark isn't just my lover, David. He's the key. He's the reason I did this. If you go to the lake house, you won't just find evidence of infidelity. You'll find evidence of what I did to protect us after Mark threatened everything." I stared down at her, breathing heavily. The panic in her eyes seemed genuine now, rooted in something darker than guilt over infidelity. A threat? Protection? "What are you protecting us from, Clara? And what did you do?" She let go of my shirt, stepping back, her eyes darting fearfully toward the camera again, as if it might start recording Mark's betrayal at any second. She looked utterly broken, ready to confess anything to stop me from leaving the house. "It involves the merger," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Mark was going to expose the fraud in the Sterling acquisition. He had the files. If he went public, we'd lose everything. Our careers, the house, prison time. I had to silence him. I needed an alibi, a cover story for why I was unreachable for 48 hours last month. Daniel was the easy part. But Mark was leverage. I set him up to look like the controlling obsessive, the blackmailer. But he found out about the camera you planted, David. He knew you were recording. He told me this morning. He said he's going to the lake house to retrieve the hard drives he hid there last week, the actual proof of the fraud, the only leverage I had left against him, and he's going to destroy them before you can upload your little video montage." My mind reeled, trying to process the layered deceit, fraud, blackmail, surveillance, and now a race against time to a remote cabin. "He's going there now?" I asked, already reaching for the door handle again. Clara nodded frantically. "Yes, but David, the lake house isn't safe right now. It's not just about the hard drives. When I was trying to get Mark to back off, I panicked. I used the spare key to go over there 2 days ago to disable the security system he set up after his first threat. I didn't know the generator was faulty. I tried to fix it myself, but I wired it wrong. If anyone tries to access the main breaker panel, or if the power fluctuates—" She trailed off, her eyes wide with a fresh wave of horror, looking down at her hands. "If what, Clara? If the power goes out? What happens?" I urged. Tears streamed down her face again, but these weren't tears of remorse. They were terror-stricken. "If the power fluctuates while the backup generator is engaged, David," she confessed, her voice cracking, "the entire south wall of the cabin, the one you insisted on putting the old oil furnace against, it blows. It's primed to explode, and Mark is driving there right now to get the drives he left inside the main storage unit, which is right next to the furnace closet." The world narrowed instantly. The betrayal, the video camera, the intricate web of affairs, it all receded into background noise. Now there was only one objective: the lake house. Mark wasn't just going to destroy evidence. He was walking into a potential death trap, a trap Clara had inadvertently set while attempting to secure the leverage she needed to silence him. "You booby-trapped your own safety net?" I spat, unable to process the sheer recklessness. "You risked blowing up your leverage and potentially Mark just to get ahead of a blackmailer?" Clara clung to my arm again, her grip surprisingly strong, fueled by sheer adrenaline. "It wasn't a trap for Mark. It was meant to be a temporary shutdown. I just needed to cut the external feed to his hidden trail cam. He set one up to watch the property line. I didn't know the wiring was that unstable. I told you, I fixed the wrong circuit." I pulled my arm free with a sharp tug. I didn't have time for her fumbling explanations or the melodrama. Mark might already be there. I looked at the lake house keys dangling from my hand, then back at the clock. 8:15 a.m. If Mark was driving fast, he could be at the cabin. A grueling 2-hour drive in normal traffic within the next hour and a half. "The keys," I muttered, grabbing my jacket off the coat rack. "Which vehicle did he take?" "He usually takes his black Range Rover," Clara gasped, stumbling backward as I moved toward the garage door. "But he might have taken the company sedan this morning to look less conspicuous. David, you can't go. If you confront him, he'll assume you know everything about the fraud, and he'll go for the drives anyway. You need to call the police." "And tell them what, Clara? That my wife is having an affair with my best friend, who is also blackmailing us over corporate fraud, and that she might have rigged the cabin with an explosive device while trying to disable his surveillance equipment? They'll lock us both up, or worse, send a wellness check that ends with Mark realizing he's exposed and panicking." I yanked the garage door opener from the visor of my own car. My sedan was reliable, but Mark's Rover or the company sedan would be faster on the highway stretch. I had to assume Mark was already en route. "I'm taking my bike," I announced, already unlatching the door to the small shed where my vintage Norton was stored. It was faster through traffic, more agile, and far less likely to be noticed by anyone casing the roads leading up to the remote lake community. Clara raced to the shed door, trying to block my entry. Her composure had completely disintegrated. She was haggard, desperate, and genuinely terrified for Mark. Or perhaps terrified of what Mark would reveal if he didn't retrieve those drives. "He has the drives in a fireproof lockbox, David. It's small. He's smart. He won't be anywhere near the furnace if he knows what's at stake. Please, let me call him. I can talk him down." "You can't talk him down," I said, shoving the shed door open with my shoulder, sending Clara stumbling against the gardening tools. "You tried to control him with blackmail, and it backfired. I'm not going in there to talk. I'm going in there to secure the evidence, neutralize the potential hazard, and see if my supposed friend is still alive." I swung my leg over the Norton. The engine roared to life instantly, loud and aggressive, a necessary contrast to the quiet, suffocating house. I threw on my helmet, the visor snapping down, isolating me further in my own mission. As I pulled out of the driveway, Clara stood at the end of the cul-de-sac, her hands covering her mouth, a silent scream trapped beneath her palms. The drive was a blur of adrenaline and rage. Every red light was an enemy, every slow driver a target for my silent, furious curses. I chewed the scenery, pushing the Norton to its limits on the winding back roads that led toward the hills where our cabin sat. A place that was supposed to be our sanctuary, now the potential epicenter of an explosion. 1 hour and 45 minutes later, I was turning off the main asphalt road onto the rutted, overgrown dirt track that led to the lake. The silence here was immediate, oppressive, broken only by the crunch of gravel under my tires. The trees pressed in close, dark and ancient. I killed the engine about a quarter mile from the cabin. I couldn't risk Mark hearing the distinctive sound of my motorcycle engine and being warned. I pulled the helmet off, inhaling the damp, pine-scented air. The cabin came into view through the dense canopy. It looked exactly as it always had, rustic, neglected, the porch sagging slightly. But something was immediately wrong. The heavy, hand-carved oak front door, which always stuck slightly in the frame, was hanging ajar, slightly askew, as if it had been kicked inward with force. I slid off the bike, grabbing the heavy Maglite wrench I kept tucked in my saddlebag, my only weapon. My heart hammered against my ribs, a desperate drumbeat announcing my arrival. I crept forward, moving slowly through the overgrown yard, every twig snap echoing like a gunshot in the silence. I reached the porch steps, testing the wood cautiously before placing my full weight on them. The interior of the cabin was dark, illuminated only by stray beams of sunlight piercing the gaps in the drawn curtains. Dust motes danced in the shafts of light, swirling over familiar, forgotten furniture. It smelled heavily of mildew and old wood. "Mark!" I called out, my voice strained, trying to project authority without giving away my exact location. "It's David. Clara sent me. We need to talk about the drives." Silence. Only the faint, persistent buzzing sound, the sound of the faulty generator struggling to maintain its meager hold on the cabin's electrical system. I moved through the main room toward the hallway where the utility closet and the furnace was located. The floorboards groaned beneath my boots, each sound a warning. As I neared the end of the hall, I saw it. The door to the small utility closet stood wide open, and there, lying haphazardly just inside the frame, near the ancient black cast-iron furnace, were several pieces of shattered wood and a distinct scattering of metallic debris. It looked like a small toolbox had been violently broken open, but it wasn't the debris that froze me. It was the faint reddish stain spreading slowly across the dusty concrete floor, just beneath where the main breaker panel was mounted. It wasn't oil. And then I heard it, a low, ragged groan coming from the shadows behind the furnace itself. I raised the heavy wrench, my knuckles white. "Mark, are you in there?" A figure shifted in the deep shadow pooling behind the roaring heat of the furnace. It wasn't Mark. It was Daniel, Clara's supposed affair partner. He was slumped against the back wall, his handsome face pale and slick with sweat, a nasty, deep laceration slicing across his temple. He wasn't moving much, but he was definitely breathing. And clutched tightly in his uninjured hand, almost possessively, was a small, black, fireproof lockbox. Before I could even register why Daniel was here, why he was injured, and why he had Mark's lockbox, Daniel lifted his head slowly, his eyes focusing weakly on me. He opened his mouth, not to speak, but to cough, a wet, ragged sound that was suddenly cut short by a sharp, metallic click echoing from the exterior of the cabin. It was the sound of the main gate bolt sliding shut from the outside. And then, from the darkness just beyond the front door, the door I had left slightly ajar, a heavy boot scraped across the porch, followed by the slow, methodical sound of someone racking the slide on a shotgun. The sound of the shotgun racking, that terrifying, deliberate sh-chunk, was the sound of finality. It sealed the darkness around me, extinguishing the last sliver of rational thought. I was trapped in a derelict cabin with an injured man holding a potentially explosive secret, facing an unknown assailant who had just locked us in. My first instinct, driven by the primal need for survival, was to dive for cover. The only solid thing nearby was the furnace itself, a monstrous oil-burning relic that radiated an unbearable heat. I shoved Daniel roughly sideways, pulling him with me, using his already slumped body as a shield as I dove behind the heavy metal casing of the furnace, wrench held high. "Who is that?" I hissed at Daniel, ignoring the trickle of blood now staining my shirt where his head had rested. Daniel gasped, clutching the lockbox tighter to his chest as if it contained his last breath. "Not Mark," he choked out, his voice raw. "It's the recovery team. The firm sent them. They knew Mark was going to try to steal the drives this morning. They knew about the fraud. They assumed Mark would be here alone. They don't know about you. Or Clara." Recovery team? I felt a fresh wave of nausea. This wasn't just infidelity and blackmail. This was organized corporate crime spilling into my quiet life. What about the explosion? The generator? "Clara," Daniel managed, spitting out a piece of what looked like drywall dust. "She was trying to cut the power feed to Mark's security camera system, not the whole generator. But Mark sabotaged the wiring loop last week, knowing she'd try to tamper with it to keep him off her back. He set a kill switch trigger linked to the main breaker. If the circuit draws too much power too quickly, it overloads the backup fuel line right next to the furnace." So Clara hadn't just accidentally endangered Mark. She had walked into an expertly laid trap designed by the very man she was sleeping with. And now Daniel was here, wounded, holding the only evidence that could clear us or condemn us, while an armed team waited outside. From the front of the cabin, a booming, amplified voice cut through the silence, vibrating the very floorboards under the furnace. "We know someone is inside. We can hear the generator struggling. We are authorized personnel. Hand over the Sterling acquisition evidence now, or we will breach the structure." Breach the structure. The tone wasn't that of police. It was colder, more professional, chillingly similar to the language used by corporate security details in high-stakes negotiations. I looked at Daniel, whose eyes were now fixed on the lockbox. If they get this, we're both ruined. Prison time for insider trading, accessory to fraud. Clara, too. They'll tie her to the cleanup, too. "The box," Daniel whispered urgently, pushing it toward me. "There's a code. Clara gave it to me, just in case. She said if she couldn't reach you, I was to make sure you got the evidence, not Mark." "What's the code?" Daniel's grip on the box tightened one last time, his breath hitching violently. "It's our anniversary, October 28th, 2009, but—" He trailed off, his eyes glazing over. His head fell forward with a sickening thud against the metal of the lockbox. He was unconscious, or worse. I snatched the lockbox. It was heavy, cold, and felt like the weight of my entire future. I desperately tried the numbers on the small dial combination lock, my fingers clumsy with fear and adrenaline. 10-28-09. Click. The lock sprang open. I flipped the lid. Inside, nestled in foam padding, were 2 external hard drives, sleek and black, and a single heavy manila envelope. I pulled out the envelope first, sliding out the contents. It wasn't financial documents. It was a single, folded piece of paper. I unfolded it under the faint light cast by the struggling generator panel. It was a handwritten note in Clara's elegant script. "David, if you are reading this, then Mark found out about the camera. I apologize for everything. The fraud, the affairs, the lies. They were all real. But the explosion risk was real too. I needed you to run, not confront. The drives are necessary, yes, but they are a distraction." The real leverage isn't in the files. The real leverage is the one thing Mark needed to keep quiet, and the one thing the recovery team is coming for. I frowned, reading the sentence again, the words making no sense in the context of corporate fraud. What was the leverage that superseded financial ruin? I looked back at the bottom of the note. Clara had added one final, hastily scribbled line underlined 3 times. He never touched the box. I did, and I didn't plant the security breach. At that exact moment, the external booming voice returned, louder, more impatient, right outside the door. Last chance. We hear movement. We are initiating forced entry in 10 seconds. I slammed the lockbox shut, the contents of the envelope, the confusing note, slipping from my numb fingers and sliding under the edge of the furnace toward the heat vents. I grabbed the 2 hard drives and stuffed them deep into my jacket pocket, just as the front door splintered inward with a deafening crack. 3 figures, clad head to toe in black tactical gear, poured into the main room, their weapons raised and steady. They weren't looking at the injured Daniel or the furnace. They swept the room, their trained eyes instantly locking onto the only person in motion, me, standing up from behind the heavy bulk of the furnace, my hands empty save for the lumps in my jacket pocket. The leader barked an order into his headset, his attention fixed solely on me. Subject secured, package acquisition imminent, move on the package. But as the 3 men advanced, ready to swarm me, a 4th figure stepped calmly through the ruined doorway, silhouetted against the bright morning light. He wasn't wearing tactical gear. He was wearing a freshly pressed, expensive charcoal suit, his hair perfectly combed, holding a single, silver-plated pistol casually aimed at the leader of the black-clad team. It was Mark. He wasn't wounded. He wasn't panicking. He was smiling that confident, familiar, utterly devastating smile. "Gentlemen," Mark said, his voice smooth and entirely in control, "you're a little late. The package is already with the rightful owner. And David, I think you dropped something important near the heat source." He nodded toward the furnace. And just as I registered the fact that Mark had lured the corporate team here, not to escape them, but to ensure they cornered me, the generator let out a violent, final, metallic shriek, and the red warning light on the breaker panel blazed from dim amber to angry, pulsating crimson. The pulsing crimson light of the breaker panel was the final, terrifying visual cue. The generator, already whining in protest, gave a sickening internal lurch, and the cabin plunged into absolute, suffocating darkness. The only illumination now came from the muzzle flashes, as Mark's charcoal-suited presence ignited a sudden, chaotic firefight. "Get the drives!" Mark screamed, but his voice was suddenly muffled, distant, as the first explosive charge went off. It wasn't the furnace. It was one of the tactical team's breaching charges, possibly set off by the sudden power surge, or perhaps Mark had rigged the entire perimeter. A concussive wave slammed me against the furnace casing, knocking the air from my lungs, the heat instantly intensifying to an unbearable, searing blast. Shrapnel ripped through the air, and I heard the heavy, rhythmic sound of metal tearing apart. I didn't think. I reacted. My focus locked onto the only thing Clara had stressed that was truly vital, the note under the furnace. I dropped to my belly, ignoring the screaming pain in my ribs, crawling blindly toward the source of the faint residual heat. The tactical team, blinded by the darkness and the sudden violent chaos, were firing wildly, their targets obscured. My fingers brushed against the paper, Clara's note. I snatched it up just as another, louder explosion rocked the structure. This one felt deeper, more structural. I scrambled back, trying to use the furnace as cover, but the impact had jarred loose something critical. A low, continuous hiss began emanating from the base of the ancient oil burner, a sound far more ominous than the generator's death rattle. The fuel line. Clara hadn't just risked a fire. The system was now actively leaking. Mark, operating with terrifying calm in the dark, shouted again, this time directing his men, "Forget the hostage. Secure the perimeter breach. He has the data." The tactical team's leader responded, his voice sharp and professional, cutting through the noise. "Negative, Control. Subject is compromised. We have secondary ignition near the primary heat source. Evacuate immediate vicinity." It was the confirmation I needed. The furnace was going to blow, taking Daniel, the drives, and Mark's entire operation with it. And Clara's note suddenly made sickening sense. He never touched the box. I did. The leverage wasn't the files. The leverage was the threat of the files being destroyed, coupled with the knowledge of the rigged cabin, a contingency plan Clara had set up not for Mark, but for me. I ripped the note open again, reading the final, crucial line in the dim, flickering light of the struggling breaker. The real leverage is the one thing Mark needed to keep quiet, and the one thing the recovery team is coming for. Mark hadn't been after the fraud files. Those were planted bait for the recovery team to fight over. Mark needed to keep quiet about the one thing that tied him irrevocably to the whole setup, the one thing that could have been hidden in the cabin that wasn't in the lockbox. My eyes shot to Daniel, still slumped by the furnace, the lockbox clutched to his chest. If Mark didn't touch the box, and the files were bait, what did Clara mean? She did something? I looked back at Daniel's motionless form. His head was resting near the spreading stain of fluid on the concrete. It wasn't just drywall dust. It was oil, mingling with something else. I forced myself to look closer at the man Clara had sent as an alibi, the man who was supposed to be the easy part of the deception. Daniel's hand, still clutching the lockbox, was convulsing slightly, and his other hand, the one resting near his side, was holding something small and square, a prepaid burner phone, clearly visible now in the strobing light of the failing electrical system. Suddenly, Daniel's eyes snapped open, wide and terrifyingly lucid, fixed on me. He didn't look injured anymore. He looked like a man who had just completed his final task. "It wasn't the furnace, David," Daniel rasped, his voice strong now, entirely unlike the man who had just been knocked out. It was the gas. He slowly, deliberately raised the small burner phone toward me, his thumb hovering over a single, large icon on the screen. "Clara didn't rig the generator," Daniel whispered, a triumphant, terrible smile spreading across his face. "She only rigged the lockbox. It's laced with a contact explosive. She knew Mark would come for it. She knew the recovery team would fight Mark for it. But she didn't trust you to run. She needed you to be delayed. And I was the distraction." The man who was supposed to be the collateral damage, the wounded lover, was alive, clear-headed, and holding the detonator. "She sent you here to take the fall for the real leverage, David," Daniel hissed. "And the real leverage is the one thing Mark can never deny, the camera footage of him framing you for the initial fraud 2 years ago. That footage is on this phone, and it's about to be wiped forever." Before I could move, before I could process that Clara had orchestrated a multi-layered assassination attempt using me as the decoy to draw out Mark and the recovery team while Daniel detonated a secondary explosive, the phone screen flashed bright white, followed by a singular, high-pitched beep. The air immediately went silent, not from the blast, but from the sudden, complete absence of electricity. The generator died. The hissing stopped. The intense heat vanished. In the sudden, heavy darkness, the only thing I could hear was the muffled sound of Mark and the tactical team, now scrambling outside, realizing the cabin had gone completely dark and inert. The explosion they anticipated had been overridden by a power kill switch. And then the faint, almost imperceptible sound of a single, small object hitting the wooden floor near my feet, followed by the sound of running footsteps, not from the tactical team, but from inside the cabin, retreating rapidly into the darkness toward the back exit. I fumbled blindly in the dark, my fingers finding the small, square shape that had fallen from Daniel's hand. It wasn't the phone. It was the small, matte black remote for the hidden camera I had planted in our kitchen. And as I felt its smooth casing, a single, almost silent click sounded from the darkness where the footsteps had just been. It was the sound of the little red recording light on the remote blinking off. Clara hadn't left to be the victim. She was here, and she had just deleted every second of evidence I thought I needed to save myself.